spend a little bit more time on this story. As rescue attempts continue against the clock for the missing Titanic submarine, it's called the Titan. Now, science expert Dr. Chris Smith is here to try and help us understand what might have happened, what happens next in the rescue mission, and a few more questions. Chris, welcome. Thanks for giving us your time.
Hello. You're welcome.
Chris, one of the questions, and of course, it's an unpleasant question to sort of think or ponder about, but looking at it from the medical and sort of human perspective, what happens when 5 individuals are locked in an airtight container with a limited amount of oxygen? Would they have to change their behaviour in order to conserve oxygen? Tell us a little bit about, from a medical point of view, what's happening down there.
Yes, many of the reports have dwelled on how much oxygen is remaining. And obviously, no one can survive without oxygen. But there's one other gas which imperils you more, in fact, and that's carbon dioxide. And we haven't heard much about that because when we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out CO2. And if this isn't removed from the environment, it's far more poisonous for you and will kill you far more quickly than not enough oxygen. You can go to the top of Everest where the oxygen level getting into your blood is much, much lower and you survive. So these people could survive with much less oxygen, but if CO2 builds up, it's directly toxic because it's an acid, it upsets your metabolism and your blood biochemistry, and it will very quickly put pay to you. So there has to be a good system for scrubbing out the CO2 as well. So that's what we'd also like to know is, are they well equipped with systems that will remove the CO2? Because that is the one that's going to be a bigger threat. In terms of what you can do if you're in that situation, as I said, everyone needs oxygen and no one can survive without it. So reducing the amount of oxygen you're using is your priority. And if you reduce the amount of oxygen you're using, you will produce less CO2 because your metabolism is a bit lower. So what these people should do, if they can, is to do as little as possible for as much time as possible. Lie down, go to sleep, try to reduce your metabolic rate. Getting cold, paradoxically, it doesn't sound ideal, but this reduces your metabolism and also reduces your oxygen consumption and therefore your CO2 production. So minimize activity, minimize the temperature, do as little as possible. If you can go to sleep, your metabolism will drop. And this gives you your best prospects of eking out the resources they have.
I was reading something that's similar that had happened, and the people who were trapped inside, they decided they weren't going to verbally communicate to conserve oxygen, and they were communicating by squeezes and by touch in order to reserve oxygen. Let's take a question from Isla on Facebook, who says, why is it so hard to locate the area the noises were heard or any signalling from the sub? Chris, we heard that an Ajax aircraft picked up some knocking noises. We haven't heard much coming off the back of that news, i.e. a sort of a narrowing of the searching. Why is that?
Well, first of all, why can we not just make a mobile phone call to these people? The answer is that radio waves, which mobile phone signals and other forms of radio communication use, don't transmit very far, just a few tens of meters through water. So you have to use some method of transmission or communication that does transmit well through water. Sound waves transmit very well through water. But as sound goes from a source, like a sonar source, to a target, it spreads out. Just imagine you dropping a pebble into a pond, you see the ripples spreading out. So you've got to pick up those ripples and then work out where the stone dropped in the pond based on the shape and trajectory of the ripples. And as the distances get greater, it becomes much, much harder to do. Most ships are equipped with sonar equipment, if they have it, that works down to a mile or so underwater. This ship is down at 4 kilometers or more than 2 miles underwater. So it's beyond the reach of most sonar. And then there's another trick that the ocean plays, which is as you go down underwater, the density of the water, partly because of its temperature, changes and it becomes a lot denser below a certain level. And this creates almost like a barrier to sound. So when the sound waves from sonar equipment go down, they hit this barrier and they change direction. It's called refraction. And this can also, in the same way that when you put your toothbrush in water, it looks like it's bent, it will give you a misview or a misaligned view of where the sound might be coming from. And then you've got to take into account that this is a debris field on the ocean floor. The Titanic is there. There are bits that have come off the Titanic. There's a lot of other material there, and they're all going to produce echoes, which could be the sub, but they could also be debris and other materials. So sorting out the wheat from the chaff when you can't go and see it, you just have echoes to go on, means this is very, very difficult. And they're operating in the ocean, hundreds of miles from shore, with all kinds of currents and rough seas to contend with. So they're really up against it with this one.
And Chris, lastly, but briefly, we don't really know, we can't be certain that the sub is lying on the floor of the ocean, can we? Because this sub was equipped with what they call a dead man's trigger, where if anything went wrong, balloons would inflate and it would bring it out to the surface. But of course, the problem is, again, due to the design of the sub, even if you're bobbling along at the surface, you can't get out. You have to be let out from this sub. You can't actually physically open a hatch or anything. Are there any chances that this sub, unfortunately, tragically, is just bobbing around someplace in the ocean and we can't see it? But it's actually on the surface.
That's right. Indeed. The submarine has a surfacing mechanism, which means you dump excess weight. This increases your buoyancy, and so naturally you float upwards. And under emergency circumstances, or just to bring the craft to the surface, you dump the dead weight and up you come. But if you don't have some kind of way of alerting the support craft where you are, especially if you've gone off course, you're talking about something which is narrower than your swimming pool that you go and swim in at the local swimming centre, in an ocean with hundreds of miles of water, rough seas and waves all around you. And the amount of surface that it's going to present at the surface for you to see is very, very small. So that's another challenge for people who, even if the craft has made it to the surface, are going to be looking for, and they're going to find it very difficult to see. You need strobe lights, you need other kinds of signals. And if something's gone wrong and those systems have been disabled, you are looking for a needle in a haystack, which is why this is so difficult.